Hey everybody, I got something exciting that I wanted to share with you today because we are going to be looking at what is quite possibly the second ever Wagon Gambit that's been played in a FIDE-Rated game. We've covered the first game already, but this time we're going to be looking at a game between a viewer named Tom Vantoff, who has the black pieces in this game, and he's playing in a tournament for about 600 euros. This was a round 2 game. I don't have all of the details. He did very well in the tournament, but I don't think he placed first. So in this game, it started off with d4, knight f6, c4, a6. This is the start of the Wagon Gambit. And after knight to c3, b5 was played. After takes, knight takes b5, we saw e5. And this is the Wagon Gambit. You put the knight in on e4, and from here we're going to see what kind of exciting variation the opponent is going to come up with this time. Well, the opponent played knight to c3, which is definitely the most common thing that you're going to see. Again, in this position, black is already threatening bishop to b4 to win the game on the spot. So the most logical, or at least maybe the first thing that you might come up with as white is, well, let's just put this piece back on c3. So now he follows up with bishop to b4, putting more pressure on c3. Black is obviously down 2 pawns, but maybe should be able to generate some sort of compensation for it. And which variation will white come up with? There's quite a lot of things that can happen. Bishop to d2, there's a lot of different queen moves that might be played. Some of these are just losing. Some of them get very interesting. Well, today we're going to be discussing the queen to d4 line. And at first, this looks like perhaps black has just made a very large mistake because the queen comes out, 2 pieces get attacked. What exactly are you going to do? Well, you have a very clever move, and you have to play this move. There's actually only one move for black, but if you can spot this very clever move, which our protagonist here has found, rook to a4, you're going to get already kind of an interesting position. And I think if you're playing this with white, maybe you weren't expecting that move because it looks like the knight was guarding it, but it's not really because it's pinned. And it also kind of looks like, well, this knight could be like hanging, but it's not really because there's some tactics involving being able to win the queen. Things are already getting wild, and there's a lot of mistakes that opponents might make on this move. However, his opponent came up with the best move, which is queen to d3, just getting out of the pin. Because if you don't get out of the pin, black is just threatening to take this knight and then scoop up the queen. Now, the most common mistake that you're going to see, I do want to spend just a little bit of time hammering in some of the theory in this position. And one of the most common mistakes you're going to see is bishop coming out to d2. If you get here, it's actually quite simple. You take here. And at first, maybe it looks like this would be an impossibility because now certainly the rook is hanging, right? So they'll just simply take this, but actually we can take here. And after the king moves over, the simplest is to just quite simply take here. I think there's some other computer accurate moves if you want to start going in for some crazy plans, but even just going for this in winning material is good enough for black. Other than that, we did see a game on this channel with Andrekin, the only super GM that's ever played this. He got into this position and played the move queen to e3, which is actually a huge mistake. Now, Andrekin did win this game with white, but black was able to play bishop to c5. This is just one of these like recurring threats in this position, and he ran into a lot of issues on the f2 square, and it was actually so bad that he decided he needed to sack a queen, and some position like this happened on the board. And even though it looks like maybe white still has a material edge, this should be very good for black, and this has already been kind of discussed. Well, in our game, our hero here, his opponent played queen to d3, so this is very nice because we're going to get to see what should actually happen in a game like this. Now, there's 2 things that can happen. And this is the last time I kind of want to branch out. After this, we'll kind of see what happened in the game. Because in this position, which is the critical line in the queen d4 variation, our protagonist played the move pawn to d5. And this is a very fascinating idea, even though it's basically never been played. At least in the Lichess database, there's nothing there. Nobody has ever kind of come up with this idea. I do want to point out that there is just a very interesting, super complicated variation. Just want to point it out of interest. Last divergent, I promise. Bishop to a6 is what most people have come up with in this position. And this leads to a lot of fun. Now, again, this knight is not hanging because we would be able to take and scoop up the queen. So the queen needs to move again. And she needs to keep protection of this knight. So the most logical square for the queen to go to is c2. But now there's this crazy move. queen to h4, just directly going in for this. And what is white going to do? Well, most likely, they are going to play the move g3. They got to somehow block your queen from taking on f2. But now comes the fun. If you can get to this position, and this is one option you have as black, you can now take on c3, and you can leave your queen hanging, and either white is going to take your queen, or they're going to take this knight. And if they take your queen, you now have this remarkable move. Knight goes back to e4. Now, this is a check. There's not a lot of good ways out. If you do decide to run with your king, you actually get checkmated in one move. Look at the power of this bishop. So what you need to do is go here, and that means now if we take this and here, again, we're like almost threatening to get this mate in, but then the bishop would be undefended. You have this remarkable move, saving your rook, defending your bishop, but if white is careless, you're also just simply threatening a checkmate in one. Now, white can survive here by giving up their queen, and the game can continue, but it just kind of goes to show there's a lot of very fun, interesting lines. And another thing that could happen, if you get back to this position, again, we arrived there by playing bishop to a6, and after the queen goes back, queen coming to h4. Another interesting happens if after you take this knight, instead of taking your queen, it's also possible that they could take right here, but now you can hit them with a very fancy looking move, because it kind of looks like, okay, queen is attacked, bishop is attacked, it's kind of fallen apart, but no, you have queen to e4. Queen to e4, attacking the queen in this. That means that your queen is hanging, of course, but the idea was you'd be able to take here, and after something like this, you can make all of these captures, and white is still up a pawn, but it's actually not so easy to protect, and black has quite a lot of activity in a position like this. So there's so many fun things that could potentially happen. Okay, back to our actual game. This is what really happened in our game now. After rook to a4, queen to d3, we saw pawn to d5. And this also is another very fascinating idea, because after the opponent takes en passant, Tom decided to castle. He's just sacking another pawn, and he's hoping that the opponent will potentially take this guy so he can just get his queen out. He's going to be sacking a ton of pawns. Look, he's down 3 pawns already. The opponent comes up with bishop to d2. This is a very reasonable move, because all of a sudden, if this guy's not pinned, that means sometimes this rook will be attacked, although maybe not really. What is black going to do? Maybe this guy becomes a potential target that can be captured now. So he decides to take this bishop, and after the queen takes back, instead of recapturing this pawn, that's not really even on the agenda is put as much pressure on the opponent as possible, black plays queen to f6, putting more pressure on this, and potentially has an interesting idea that you can sometimes play in the wagon, that idea being rook to a3. This now suddenly becomes like a kind of tactical motif, with the idea that you wouldn't be able to take because we'd be taking this knight, and you're just putting a ton of pressure on this guy. And also in some position where you play rook to a3, if this rook ever came up to protect, you're always taking this a2 pawn because this guy is in a major pin. Now, fortunately for the viewers, white decides to get greedy, and this is actually an amazing position. White is up 4 total pawns, but it's not even clear that they have an advantage. If you ask a computer, it's actually going to say 0.00. This is an insanely equal position, and what that means is it's going to be a lot of fun to play as black, because now knight to a6 comes on the board. Maybe we're going for this pawn, but not likely. The usual plan is to bring this knight out to c5. And from c5, this knight would be threatening to go both to b3, which would be a fork, exploiting the a pawn, also to e4, where it would be putting even more pressure on c3, attacking this queen. This knight has some very serious future. Now, white was maybe worried that rook a3 is a potential threat, and they played this move pawn to a3. Attacking the bishop, but not really. There is a pin here on the A file, so it's not something that is clearly needing to be worried about. Now comes knight to c5. The knight is coming in with a fork. The knight might be coming into e5. Suddenly, white is actually in a little bit of trouble. It's no longer easy to play this position at all, which is remarkable. So the opponent tries to move the queen. This gets out of the potential fork, but the knight goes into b3 anyway and attacks the rook. And I guess around here, white had sort of realized that they're in an incredible amount of trouble. And they try to play rook to c1. I guess just saying, you know what? Just take an exchange back, get a little bit of material or something, just take my rook, please. But black found an even stronger move. Bishop to c5, and all of a sudden, you're putting a lot of pressure on f2, and if the queen goes too far away from the rook, I don't know where the queen would go, you might just simply drop the rook altogether. So bishop c5, a huge find. The queen does go all the way over to g3, and I guess is like, okay, just please, like, at least just take my rook. No, an even stronger move? Rook to g4. The black rook was attacked, so if you had just taken this, they would have taken your rook. So black swings this guy over, attacks the queen, and all of a sudden you're busted. You don't really have a way to protect this and your rook anymore. There's no safe square to go. If you just go here, for example, we're just gonna play this. We still got pressure on this guy. We still are taking your rook at some moment. It's all fallen apart. So white needs to get a little bit tricky, needs to come up with something, and tries this move, knight to d5. This is an excellent try. The knight comes in, it's attacking the queen. Okay, we can understand that much. And now the queen is looking at this knight. So if white is really lucky, they'll be able to capture the knight, or maybe they can get out of it. But actually, queen takes b2, defends the knight, attacks the rook, and this queen is still under attack. So the queen needs to move again. And she goes to c3. White is still just saying, please, come on, let's trade. I would like to get the show on the road. And black says, all right, now is the time. And he makes all of these trades. And you get to an endgame like this where it's actually black that is suddenly up a lot of material. So fantastic. Also, black is still very active. You do need to be a little bit cautious because there's some of these pawns just kind of lurking around. f3 was attempted by the opponent. The rook went over to d4. f3, I guess the idea is you're going to be playing e4 in order to support this knight. And I think it was not here, but soon, that the only real mistake by black was played in this game. Bishop takes a3. Knight to e2, and I do like that all of these positions, what you're going to see kind of a recurring pattern that you can kind of learn from black's play, is that he gets a lot of options to just kind of trade and be simple, but he always finds kind of interesting, creative ways that avoid it. It's good for spectators, but it's also just kind of a good strategy in general. He gives this check, and then takes on d5. He's just trying to remove this very pesky knight. And this is the position where the only real mistake was made, and otherwise like near masterpiece by black. The computer here points out that black wins very simply by going in and attacking the rook, and the knight is never actually trapped, because whenever the king comes and tries to get it, you can either check it away, or the knight can just simply hop away to this square. So something like this would have been the winning maneuver. It's a bit weird, it's a bit awkward, I think, for a human to do it. But instead of that, we see knight to b4, the only mistake. And this doesn't throw the game away, but it does give white a serious chance. And the problem with knight to b4, which has the idea that it just simply, it wants to go about trying to target this pawn, and maybe if the pawn moves, eventually the bishop will be able to take it. If black can just simply take all of these pawns and avoid anything from becoming a queen, they're going to win. But this would have allowed knight to c3, which was not played in the game. And the problem is not this knight, but rather this bishop, because now white could play bishop to c4, rook out to a1, and it becomes a little bit uncomfortable. And maybe the bishop is not going to get lost and not going to get trapped, but it does give white some chances to hold this position. However, in the game, after knight to b4, quite a relief to black. The king goes to c3 and just allows this pawn to be captured with check. So now black is back on the winning plan. So he goes here, he's going to be able to take this. Once you get this last pawn, it should be simple, but at the same time, it's still a symmetrical pawn structure. So even if you are up one piece, I don't know, maybe sometimes there's a chance for white to hold. Let's see what black came up with. And again, okay, here's another example of the kind of thing I'm saying. Again, I think it's very simple for people to trade or to take something, but he just develops a piece, which is a really cool thing to see. Like, he's not worried about you creating any threats. He just develops a piece so that now if you take, he's able to take back with the bishop. And okay, I guess now if we want to make sure we win the c-pawn, we're forced to trade, and we get to this endgame. So black is up an entire bishop. It's rook in 3 versus rook in 3, but it's very symmetrical. So it's not always easy. Sometimes there's the potential for a fortress, but here he's able to get his king into the game, bring his rook to the 7th rank so that it's able to defend against anything that white is going to be doing. And let's check, the endgame technique was actually very good here. brings the king all the way up. The rook comes to prevent the king from being able to run in anymore. And at some moment, white plays h4, placing this pawn on a dark square. And at some moment, black was able to just go and win that pawn. If you can get them on the same color as your bishop, you might be able to win the pawn. That's exactly what happened. Here he's able to take. This pawn is defended by the rook. And now he's able to quite simply march these guys even more. So gets pressure on this guy. Rook is now stuck defending him, kicks the king away a little bit, kicks the rook away a little bit, and then, sneakiest of all, waits for the king to move away, and then, boom, forces a trade of rooks, which also forces a resignation. So, congratulations to Tom, and if you like that, make sure you subscribe.